Welcome to How to Become a Production SQL Database Administrator. My name is Raphael. In the next several videos, we're going to be looking into a tool that comes with SQL Server, and that is the SQL Profiler. We're going to begin by asking what is the SQL Profiler and its function, and then I'm going to demonstrate to you with several videos the capabilities of SQL Profiler. So let's begin by asking the question, what is the SQL Profiler? Well, SQL Profiler is a graphical tool that allows the DBAs or system administrators to monitor events that are occurring in the instance of SQL Server. And once those events and data is captured, you can save them to a file or a table for later analysis. And this will become clearer as I demonstrate that to you in a second. So the next several videos that I'm going to be demonstrating is the capabilities of the profiler. And specifically, I'm going to be showing you each individual video following these questions. I'm going to show you how to monitor and give you a general overview of what the SQL profiler is and how to navigate and save what's called a trace. I'm going to show you some of the ways the SQL server, primarily this is what it does. It captures all TSQL statements and stored procedures that are running in the background. And you'll see that in a second also. I'm going to be using the SQL Profiler, and I certainly use this in a production environment, and I think most DBAs do that, is to identify which queries are causing a tremendous amount of performance issues, are causing a tremendous time to execute. So this is a great way of capturing that data. This is another thing that I do in the production environment, and that is to use it as an audit capability, although there's other devices that we use, but this is a great one also. And then obviously we're going to be using what's called a template, SQL Profiler template, to analyze indexing. And I'll be demonstrating that to you also. And then finally, I'm going to have a video dedicated to, when we're kind of going through all these videos, what is the best practice in using SQL Profiler? Now, one of the reasons SQL Profiler is somewhat neglected, I think, in the DBA world is because it captures a tremendous amount of data, and it is resource intense, so they try to avoid this. But if you do it properly with some of the best practices, it's a great tool to use. Some of the do's and don'ts, since the profiler adds a tremendous amount of overhead in the production server, when capturing a trace, we want to be judicious in executing when and where for the profiler, and I'll show you that in a second. When you save a trace, you can save it to a file or a table, but I prefer to save it to a file first and then convert it to a table if I need to analyze it. And I'll show you that demonstration also. Try to use the SQL Profiler for short periods of time if you have to. As I said, it is resource intense and it does consume a lot of CPUs. So you certainly don't want to be running these CPUs in a production environment for a great long period of times, although you're going to have to, because that's the whole idea of SQL Profiler. You'll notice that as I move along that one of the best practices is to configure the trace only for the relevant events and columns, and I'll show you that in a second also. Some of the terminology is an event, trace, and template. You maybe see me use these words, so we'll just take an idea of what these are. And when we go through these demonstration, all this will become extremely clear. So let's get into it actually and start. So again, what is the SQL Profiler? It's a graphical tool that allows the DBAs to monitor events in an instant by capturing all what's going on in the background of the T-SQL and the stored procedures and various other events. So let's hop onto it and let's see that in action. So I'm going to go into my SQL here, and to start the SQL Profiler, start obviously your Management Studio, go to Tools, and there you'll see Tools, SQL Profiler. Click on it. It's going to make a connection to the server itself, and go connect. The first window that pops up when you do that, obviously, is right here. So now that is called the trace properties. Let me go over briefly what these properties are. As you can see, you can give it this trace a name. The trace provider name, obviously, is the instance that we're using. Ours is 2014. Trace provider type, obviously, is a 2014 version, and so on. So this is just basic information. Now, this is what I was talking about, that it comes with built-in templates. As you can see, it's defaulted to the standard template. If you click on the drop-down list, you'll see the other templates. And we'll be using some of those, and I certainly use the duration one, I certainly use the tuning one, and then I create my own blank ones also. So these are some of the default templates. So let's look at that actual template before I move on. And what this does is, if I click on the events, now here is the definition of events. These are the events. If I hover over them, you'll see that as I hover over them, you'll get the explanation here. So if I actually, let me collapse these or retract them. These are the events, the security audit. And if I expand that, you can see subclasses here. And if I, as I said, hover over them, you can get an idea of what they are. And this is another event. And there are a lot of events. And I'll be showing you that in a second. But these events are related only to this specific template. If I drop down this and look at duration, and then go back to event selection, you'll notice that the events are slightly different. In this case, we're capturing two events, basically, the store procedures and the T-SQLs. And these are sub-events within the category here and back and so on. So if I go to another one for tuning, for example, and look at it, you'll see they're slightly different. The other thing you'll notice is that each event comes along with specific columns here. Here you have text, data, duration, SPID, database ID, name, object, and so on. And all these columns are related to these events only in that template. If I go back to general, and if I change to standard, you'll notice that the columns are slightly more. We have slightly more for that particular event. Now, obviously, you can see the check marks here. So what that allows you to do, now we're going to get a tremendous amount of data for all these events if we execute it. And as I said, one of the better practices is to filter all the data, and I'll be discussing that in more detail later. But generally speaking, let's say we don't want information about end time, start time, or SPID, then we uncheck them. And unfortunately, we can't just click on it and uncheck all. You have to do it one by one. So it's kind of tedious, but that's the only way to do it. So now that if I go show events and click back, that particular event is being disappeared. The other thing to notice, obviously, is now go back to general. This is what I said, that you have the opportunity to collect that amount of data to either a file or a table. If you click on the file, a window will pop up, and let's just save it to my desktop. And I'm going to call it trace 1. I'm going to override it since I created one. And there's the actual path of the trace with the extension TRC. You'll also notice that it says set maximum file size to 5 megabytes. And then it says enable file rollover. What that means is that this SQL trace will capture all the data selected by this events, and it will dump it into this trace file and up to the maximum size of 5 megabytes. Once it reaches 5 megabytes, it'll create another file for 5 megabytes. And then once that's consumed, it'll continue to grow in increments of 5. So that's what this means. Now, since these are individual files, I don't like to navigate to individual file. So I may make that a little larger and have enable a file rollover. This time I'll get less increments of 5. So you can do that also. If you want to save the data immediately to a table, then you can do that. And obviously you'll connect to a database. And again, you can select the data, and I'll be showing you that in a second when we run the script. But again, I wouldn't advise you to run the trace and save it to a table, as you can see, there's a tremendous amount of data. The other option here is enable trace time, stop time. If you click this, it allows you to stop the trace running at a specified date and time. Now, obviously, this is important because if you kind of forget to monitor this can consume the entire space. So you may want to set the date and time when to stop the trace. Unfortunately, it doesn't have a start time for some reason. So just take an event there. So back to events. Now, if I run this, a few more things before I want to do this. You'll notice here for the standard template, if I click on these are the events, and these are the related data that associated with the events that we'll be seeing. If you want to see more events, then you click on here, and you can see all these events being right here. So you can see there's a tremendous amount of events that you can monitor. So if I go to database and expand that, I can monitor the event of database file auto grow or auto shrink if that's occurring, log, and so on. and so forth. So I'll let you worry about that. And we'll be discussing a few of these more. So the other thing is, if you'll notice here that we have a selected amount of columns. However, if you click on this, it'll show you all the columns that are related. So now if I want to capture that data for the database name for that event, then I have to check them, unfortunately, one by one. And if I go down, and there we go. As soon as I uncheck everything, it changes. So you'll know that you've selected or unselected everything. When this database name changes, you can see this changes to gray. The other thing you want to do when you're running a trace, obviously, is column filter here. And obviously, as I mentioned, that when you run the trace, which we will in a second, it captures all the activity against all databases. So what we want to do is navigate to a specific database. And the way you can do that, obviously, is show all columns, right-click here, or scroll, and let's select the database name. Go all the way down. And now if I uncheck this, you'll notice that for that event, I also have now the database name. And now I can filter it, and I can select the specific database and put the specific name of the database that I want the SQL Profiler to run against, rather than all the databases. And we'll be seeing that in terms of best practices. The other thing you can do, obviously, is organize data. You'll notice, organize columns, I should say. You'll notice that the columns in sequence are text data, application name, user, login, and so on. If we click on this, you'll see that it's in the same order. If I want to see duration as I see it priority, I can just push that up or push that down. And you can see now next to text is the application name. As soon as I click on this, you'll see the duration has been adjusted. So now let's run this and see what's going on here. So now that obviously this server is not that busy, but you can see that there's a little activity going on here, and now it's capturing everything for that template, all the application names that are running against it, the username, the login, the CPU usage, and so on. So let's create a little activity, and you can actually see what's going on here. So now I'm going to open SQL. I'm going to just minimize this actually so we can see it concurrently. And now you'll notice here that, let me just bring this down so you can have a better view. As soon as I execute this, it's going to capture it. So remember, the primary purpose of SQL Profiler is to capture all activity, both the TSQL and the store procedures that are running against other things against the server. So now if I execute this statement, you'll see it immediately pop up here. If I run up here and execute that, it's collecting that statement also. And again, it's collecting all the SQL activity against it. Obviously here I can go up here and I can pause, and you can see the trace is paused, and I can stop it, and I can run it again if I want to. So that's basically the premise of SQL Profiler, is to capture activity against the server or the specific databases that you've specified if you filtered it. Now, as you can see, I ran those statements, and you can see them here. If I just expand this a little, you can see that these are the select statement that I ran just this second ago. Now, once you've captured that, the whole idea of SQL Profiler is, now this is not being captured. I can't do any analysis on this right now. If I want to do analysis, then I can save this data to a file. And that's what I'm going to do right now. So you can go File, Save As, Trace File. I'm going to call it Trace File here. It's on my desktop. I'm going to save it, and I'm going to save that actual data. Now I can close this. Are you still running? Yes. I can even close the SQL server. And now if I want to come back to that file and do a little analysis, I can do that. I can just go to the trace, double-click it, and you can see that trace has been captured. And this is a trace. A trace is a collection of all the data that has been executed against the SQL server. So now that if I've collected all this, I can do even further analysis. Is I can dump this to a table. So I can go File, Save As. Now I'm doing this after the fact. I don't want to do this on a production because converting this, if you will, from a file to a table, depending on the size, does take a tremendous amount of time. So I'm going to select the database that I want it to dump to. I'm going to just call it trace 1, and go OK. And now it will save it into a table, into this database called trace 1. As soon as I go OK, and obviously this is a very few rows right here, but on a production table, this could be in the hundreds of thousands, if not millions. So you've got to be careful about that. Now that I've saved it to a table, I can actually get out of this and go to my database. And now if I execute, or I should say expand, and there it is. And now if I right-click, script it out, you can see all the columns and the events. If I execute it, you can see all the data has been collected from that file. And now what this will allow me to do is, through filtering, using T-SQL, I can filter the text, because this is what I'm primarily interested in. I'm primarily interested in these select statement, not this. So now I'm going to do some select statements and filters and navigate to the actual data that I wanted to analyze. So this is a great way of analyzing it. And we can look at now other things such as the duration. This is going to be one of the key factors that I'll be demonstrating to you when we look at which files take a long time. So this is an important duration. When we have other issues for performance issues, CPU usage comes in, reads and writes, and again, we'll be demonstrating that to you also. If you want to navigate for security reasons and determine who's doing what and what activity is going on against a specific login, then obviously we can filter using that, and I'll be demonstrating that to you also. So this gives you an idea of how to use SQL Profiler. Its primary function is to monitor events in an instant and capture those events and data that are going on in the background, and then you can save it for analysis or for security. So this kind of covers the first thing of creating a trace, and I've demonstrated that to how do you create a trace, and it's very simple. So, and then as I said, you can keep it to a file or a table for later analysis. So the next coming videos, we'll get into a little more deeper into what the SQL Profiler does, and give you a demonstration of actual what I do in a production environment, so you can have a better understanding of how to utilize this great tool. And as I said, this is a great utility to find this and do this and do these. These are the three ones that I primarily use on a weekly or a monthly basis if I need it. So this one, I'll demonstrate that in the next coming videos. So I think I'll leave it there, and we'll continue with the next video. So my name is Raphael, and this is how to become a production SQL database administrator. See you in the next video.